reasons you feel an MBA is a bad investment for a student, and what do you feel is a better path to management and career success? I mean, based on your answer, they may drop out of BU, and then BU is going to be mad at me and mad at you, but you live further away.
Look, I'm always skeptical of giving absolutely sweeping pronouncements. So there's, saying that an MBA is, bad for everybody is incorrect. In terms of the entrepreneurship technology context, I do think that the general profile of an MBA student is sort of the anti-Asperger's. They're very, very extroverted. You often have people with somewhat low conviction. You have sort of this hothouse environment where they spend 2 years with other people just like themselves. And at the end of the 2 years, people often end up deciding collectively to all try to catch the last wave. And so they've done these studies on business schools where people systematically tend to go into the fields that are just about the wrong ones. And so there is something about the approach that I think leads to this sort of herd-like thinking that's always problematic. It's not necessary, but it's something that's, I think, that if you are in an MBA program, you would do well to be extremely aware of and to try to very powerfully resist.
And is your advice about what to do is just to kind of be out there getting experience, building companies, working for growing companies?
I would say what I don't like about, if I had to say what I don't like about an MBA, is that is the conceit is that business is a process, that it's about management. There's this thing called management that works equally well everywhere, whether you're running a chemical engineering company, or whether you're running a software company, or whether you're running a restaurant or a rocket company, and it puts too much of the stress on process. And what always does matter a lot is having having substance, or being actually genuinely passionate about some very specific vertical thing. And the vibe one gets from many people in MBA programs is that they're sort of these lost souls who have no idea what they want to do with their lives. Is that you should think for yourself. And I think when I look back on my own trajectory, the mistake that it's hard to know whether I would do it differently. I might still go to college and law school, but a mistake I made was never thinking about what the purpose of it was or why I was doing it. It was just this automatic thing that you did because you were told if you did it, you'd have all these options that would get created, and it would all sort of automatically work out on its own. And in retrospect, I would have tried to think harder about why I was doing it and where I saw it going.
Because this would be a familiar story if you had dropped out of Stanford and become a billionaire, but you kind of played it much straighter than Steve Jobs educationally. Was there a moment when you sort of accumulated 2 or however many degrees when you thought, this is all completely pointless? Did you have a moment of doubt about the education that you had excelled at?
Well, I think there was a moment of doubt at the point when I got onto Wall Street, and you realized that it was basically like this never-ending tournament, and the tournament just keeps going on and on. And once you realize that the tournament's not over in high school, and it's not over in college, and it's not over after that, it forced me to ask more questions about, was this the correct tournament? Was there time to do something different? And I do think that's one of the misconceptions. So one of the big questions about education is, what sort of a good is it? Is it an investment decision, a consumption decision? I think most people think of it as an insurance product, where it's you're buying insurance to protect yourself from falling through the cracks in our society. I think even that's problematic, because we should be asking why there's so many big cracks rather than how do I protect myself from it. But the reality is that it's mostly just a tournament, and you have to win the tournament. You have to be realistic about winning the tournament, and the kind of speech that people probably do not give at Harvard, and this is where I think even Harvard is probably wrong, would be, or at Brown or any other university, would be, freshman orientation, congratulations, you won the last round of the tournament, and now it's going to just get much harder. And you better redouble the effort, because there are a lot of people who are ahead of you, And if you can't see them, they're so far ahead of you that you can't even see them. And if you were to try to give a version of that speech, I don't think you would last very long as president of any university. Even a much lesser version of that would probably get you booted.
I want to hear that speech in full, but let me take another question from the floor.
Good evening. Tony Wagner, the first Innovation Education Fellow at the Technology and Entrepreneurship Center at Harvard. It's a follow-up to the last conversation. I've just finished researching and writing my 5th book called Creating Innovators, The Making of Young People Who Will Change the World. So I'm going to press you for a little more depth on response to that last question. What are the most important things we can do as parents, as teachers, as mentors, and as employers to encourage and incent young innovators?
Well, I would say, let me just, the educational question, I would say, is that people, the best reason to learn is because you're interested in the subject matter and there's some value in it. And so I would
intrinsic motivation then, as opposed to winning the tournament?
Intrinsic motivation. So I think one of the very interesting things with this program we started with the 20 students under 20 was that a number of them had actually already finished college, and they'd actually skipped a number of grades. And so I think the test for parents who have talented students is whether they would encourage their students to skip as many grades as possible. And if you think of education as a tournament, then you're not going to have your kids skip grades because you want your kids to knock out the other kids on the Harvard application process. If you think of it as learning, you will encourage your student to skip as many grades as possible. So that would be, educational advice would be, to the extent you're able to skip grades, you should skip as many as possible. So I try to get at it instead through this somewhat indirect approach of asking sort of these contrarian questions. And so the business version of the contrarian question that I always think is a good one to ask is, what great companies is nobody starting? And then the more intellectual one, which I always like asking as an interview question, is, tell me something that's true that very few people agree with you on. And this turns out to be a shockingly hard question for people to answer, even when they can read on the internet that you're going to ask it. And so it's like most test questions are less good when you know the questions in advance. This is one that actually holds up, where even if you know the question in advance, it's still a pretty good question. And I think I think there's sort of two somewhat different reasons. One is that we always think that to have an original idea requires just an unbelievable amount of brilliance, that everything's already been explored, everything's already been discovered. And that certainly is a part of it. But I think perhaps the more important part is that if you think of the literal interview context, where you are talking to the interviewer, a good answer to the question is one that the person asking it will probably disagree with. So if you come up with these perfectly conventional answers like, our education system is broken, or our government does not work very well, or things like that, those are bad answers because everybody already agrees with them. And so an answer that people don't agree with is, it's somewhat uncomfortable. And we live in a world, I think, in which courage is in much shorter supply than genius. So my goal on one level, what I try to do in 0 to 1 is offer a whole series of answers like this in the business context, things that I think that are true about business that other people don't agree with me on. Now, I thought I'd sort of go through a few of them today, and then we could open it up to more of a discussion.
So in your view, perhaps the contemporary world, it's becoming, I don't know what the word would be, stranger or weirder or more shaped by individuals who are different, precisely because conformity is being piled on other places. So if the movers and shakers would be people who are in some way neurodiverse, then overall the world is becoming more surprising in a way, right? Less what we expect at different margins and different corners. And this will accumulate. It may never feel like we're getting out of the great stagnation, but each bit of change we get is, in a way, a more different bit of change than we would get, say, in 1957, when everything was done with guys with white shirts and starched white collars and, hoping they would be able to buy a little pocket calculator someday.
I'm not sure whether I think the innovation that we are getting is driven in strange ways. I worry that I worry that actually the conformity problem is actually more acute than it was in the 50s or 60s, so that the category of the eccentric scientist or even the eccentric professor is sort of this is a species that is steadily going extinct, because there sort of is less space for that in our research universities than there used to be. And so I worry that perhaps, if anything, it's a little bit the other way. But it's very hard to measure these things or calibrate them. But I think that in politics, the conventional approach is to simply look at pollsters. What are your positions going to be? You just look at the polls. You figure this out, and it works. It works fairly well. It probably, at the end of the day, that's probably not how the system really changes. It probably will get changed by some idiosyncratic people who have really strong convictions and are over time able to convince more people of them. But whether this means that we have more or less change is hard to evaluate. But I think it always comes from these somewhat non-conventional channels.
So let's say you're trying to select people for your Thiel fellowships, or maybe to work for one of your companies, or to start a new company with. And just you, Peter Thiel, as a judge of talent, what trait do you look for in that person that is being undervalued by others? So the rest of the world out there, it's way too conformist. So there must then be unexploited profit opportunities in finding people. And if you're less conformist, which I'm very willing to believe, indeed would insist on that being the case, what is it you look for?
Well, it's very difficult to reduce it to any single traits, because a lot of what you're looking for are like these almost Zen-like opposites. So you want people who are both really stubborn and really open-minded. Okay, that's like a little bit contradictory. You want people who are sort of idiosyncratic and really different, but then who can work well together in teams. And so this is, again, sort of maybe not 180 degrees opposite, but sort of like 175 degrees.
And this is why you like Hegel.
Not. I don't like Hegel that much, so I think it's so if you sort of focus too much on one or the other end of it, you'd get it completely. You would tend to get it completely wrong. So I like to get things where you get these combinations of unusual traits. So if you have people with some really interesting, very different idea, okay, that suggests we're in the idiosyncratic category. Then the important question becomes, okay, would they actually be able to function socially and execute? And then maybe the teamwork question you'd ask would be, what's the prehistory of this company? How did you meet? How long have you been working together? And if there's a long prehistory, that would be good on the other side. So I think it's always getting these combinations right.